I'm J.R. Church. Welcome to today's program. I was sitting in church yesterday listening to the pastor talk about his text in 1 Peter. When he said Nero was the Roman emperor sitting upon the throne when Peter wrote this epistle. Of course, that triggered the neurons in my brain. In fact, it exploded the neurons in my brain. I thought, oh, now that's interesting. I had not realized that. I don't know why. Maybe I knew it and forgot it. I don't know. But I can tell you that in our book, The Mystery of the Menorah and the Hebrew Alphabet, we have a little chapter here called James through Jude. These 7 small epistles between Hebrews and the book of Revelation, which seem to describe each year of the tribulation period in chronological order. Let me read to you what I wrote. The letters of the apostles to the early church have stood as beacons throughout the church age. Their sound doctrine has defined church structure and behavior. They have provided guidance and edification for millions of believers, past and present. They also contain a great many prophecies that directly apply to the latter days. Some of these prophecies seems to lie in the relative arrangement or the juxtaposition of the biblical passages. Their placement relative to other books in the Bible actually seem to create a pattern that carries a prophetic message. More specifically, the 7 epistles that are positioned between Hebrews and Revelation appear to foreshadow the tribulation period. At first glance, it seems unlikely that such a thing could be possible, but the more we look, the more obvious the picture becomes. As we look at these 7 epistles in order, we will interpret their overall message by taking notes of the general sense of each one. We want to emphasize that as originally delivered, these epistles were intended for the church. But what of that future time when the church as such has been removed from the world? Year by year, the 7 letters take us through the tribulation, setting the tone and outlining the general events of that time. And then I begin. Year 1 of the tribulation period is described by the epistle of James, and so on. So James describes, for example, a worldwide destruction of the monetary system when he says in chapter 5, "Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl, for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten," and so on. He says your gold and silver is cankered, all right? Now, the interesting thing about this is it was written in AD 60 when Nero was on the throne. And 1 Peter, it was written in AD 60. Well, now it was in AD 54 that Nero first came to power, and it just happened to be AD 54 when Paul wrote 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, in which he described the son of perdition sitting upon the throne, or sitting upon a throne in the temple, sitting in the temple, claiming that he is God. Yes, that was AD 54 when Nero first came to power. In AD 59, Nero murdered his mother, and thus began his vicious reign of terror. In AD 60, James writes, Peter writes his first epistle. I listened to the first epistle of Peter, chapter 4 and verse 7. But the end of all things is at hand. Say, do you suppose he had a general feeling that something was going wrong in AD 60? That something apocalyptic was taking place? For the apostle Paul had written in AD 54, some 6 years earlier, that the Antichrist would sit in the temple claiming to be God, commit the abomination of desolation. Well, I think most of the world at that time felt that Nero was the Antichrist because his name added up to 666 in Hebrew letters. So here we have 1 Peter written in AD 60. 2 Peter was written in AD 66. Whoa. AD 66 was the year the Jews revolted against the Romans, and Nero sent Vespasian and Titus to put down the rebellion. And then we skip over to Jude, the last of these 7 little books, which pictures the glorious appearing of our Savior. And Jude writes in AD 66. So there we have the same year that 2 Peter was written. And this is what Jude says. He says, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these things, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment.